All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating and, let's be real, a highly frustrating phenomenon. We're looking at exactly why working harder inside a system sometimes completely backfires. If you've ever been part of a rapidly growing team that somehow felt like it was moving slower every single day, well, you're definitely going to want to hear this.
So why does this happen? What's really interesting about this question is that it challenges our deepest, most ingrained assumptions about effort and success. We're basically taught from day one that if a system is struggling, the logical, obvious fix is to just pour more energy into it. We think, okay, let's just work longer hours, or let's hire more people, or let's buy that fancy new software. But have you ever noticed that sometimes doing those exact things actually creates way more friction?
We almost always operate under the assumption that more input naturally equals better results. It just makes sense, right? But here is the massive paradox. When a system is nearing its structural capacity, forcing more input, more time, more money, more bodies doesn't actually solve the problem. It just grinds the gears and creates this massive system strain. It's not a lack of effort we're dealing with here, it's a structural condition.
Okay, so that takes us to Section 1, the paradox of effort. Let's look at a real-world example.
Think back to the late 19th century Moshevot agricultural settlements. These farmers literally had everything going for them. They had immense financial backing, top-tier modern agricultural knowledge for the time, and really robust infrastructure. And sure enough, their yields absolutely shot up. Yet despite this massive coordinated effort, their actual economic outcomes totally flatlined. The gap between what they were physically producing and what they actually gained just kept widening. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that failure in this context isn't about laziness or a lack of effort. As Dr. Nimrod Israeli observes in our source text, improvement can actually increase effort without improving outcomes. Those settlers, they were doing everything right on paper, but the underlying system they were operating within just couldn't organize that increased activity into sustained value anymore.
Which brings us to Section 2, how growth changes systems.
To understand what's really happening, we have to realize that what looks like a simple addition of people or resources actually triggers an exponential explosion in the number of relationships that you have to maintain. Think about it. When you add one person to a team of 4, you didn't just add 20% more capacity. You added a whole multitude of new communication lines. Growth transforms the internal organization of a system, not just its size. Every single addition fundamentally alters how all the parts interact with each other.
And this creates an unavoidable structural chain reaction. It goes like this. Growth breeds complexity. To handle that sudden complexity, the system is forced into differentiation, basically separating out functions. But by separating them, it intimately binds them together, creating a massive interdependence. You literally can't have one step without triggering the next. It is a structural inevitability.
Actually, we can see this exact universal trajectory playing out throughout all of human history. Early societies were constantly forced to reorganize their structures to handle growing populations. A small band of early humans, they could coordinate just by knowing each other directly. But as they grew, that direct familiarity became mathematically impossible. They hit a constraint. So they transformed into tribes, using shared identity and language to coordinate. And when those tribes grew too large, they transformed again into villages, coordinating through spatial proximity. The key here is they didn't just scale up, they fundamentally reorganized how they connected.
Now let's look at what happens when that goes too far in Section 3, the interdependence trap.
I want you to think of this like a towering stack of hyper-specialized puzzle pieces. As these components become incredibly capable at their one specific job, their individual self-sufficiency completely drops to zero. Because no single component can stand alone anymore, vulnerability skyrockets. A single tiny failure can propagate through the entire fragile network in an instant. What was once a resilient, simple group is now this hyper-fragile, interdependent web.
And at this stage, the main problem shifts entirely. It's no longer about expanding the system, it's simply about coordinating the dense web of relationships it just created. The system's success doesn't depend on how good the individual parts are anymore. It depends completely on the quality of the relationships between those parts. Because if you can't coordinate that interdependence, all the raw capability in the world is totally useless.
That leads us right into Section 4, hitting the structural ceiling.
0. This is exactly the amount of progress you make when a system's coordination capacity is totally exhausted. It means any additional effort you put in yields diminishing returns. When the structure can no longer manage the sheer density of its own internal relationships, adding more inputs actually pushes your progress below 0. It creates active harm. The new additions just violently bounce around a strained network, causing pure interference rather than actual output.
A system can possess absolutely incredible capability, kind of like having a dozen incredibly powerful rockets, but totally lacked the coherence to point them all in the same direction. You might honestly have the best tech and the absolute smartest people in the room, but without the right structural container to organize those capabilities, your high-performing parts are just generating noise and friction.
And ironically, our immediate knee-jerk reflex to fix this declining performance is to add more processes, which just intensifies the complexity and chokes the system even further. When things slow down, what do we usually do? We schedule more meetings. We buy some new project management tool. We add another layer of middle management. But remember, the problem is already too many relationships to coordinate. By adding these localized fixes, we're literally just throwing more nodes into an already exhausted network. We amplify the friction, we get locked into this vicious cycle of structural inertia, where the very things we are doing to save the system are the exact things actively destroying it.
Finally, we reach the crossroads in Section 5, transformation or decline.
Let this profound distinction really sink in. Once that structural ceiling is hit, optimizing your current workflow is simply no longer mathematically viable. You literally cannot optimize your way out of a structural constraint. Optimization is for when the structure still has room to breathe. When the structure is choking, you have to change the structure itself. You have to completely reorganize the way the entire system connects.
Because this foundational law dictates that stagnation isn't a failure of willpower. It's not people being lazy. It is a blindingly clear signal that it's time to build a totally new structure. Systems will always grow, complexity is always going to increase, and existing structures will always eventually hit a breaking point. Recognizing this is huge because it means you stop blaming individuals for not working hard enough and you finally start looking at the design of the environment they are trapped in. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to chew on regarding your own teams, your companies, or your communities as you navigate your own growth. Next time you feel like you are running twice as fast just to stay in the exact same place, take a step back. Stop looking at the effort and start looking at the structure. It might just be time for a transformation. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a powerful new lens to view the systems around you. Catch you next time.